Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Now, today we're going to be talking about ethnographies. We're also going to be talking about case studies in the subsequent lecture. But today we're going to be talking about ethnographies. An ethnography is a kind of research method in which we actually observe people. We may sit down at an airport and observe how the flow of traffic goes. We may sit down in a coffee shop to observe what people do online while they're going to make a coffee order. And so these kinds of research studies are very, very vital in understanding human processes and understanding how a process goes about itself, especially from a human perspective. We've really adopted this method in marketing and advertising from anthropologists. And so anthropologists and others who are interested in studying tribes and even studying animals and how animals create communities and tribes, this method really has been taken from that. And so ethnographies are very, very valuable in kind of piecing together a lot of complex information at once. If we think about it, through all of the lectures we've had, how would you even begin to evaluate airport traffic? I mean, certainly you can look at sales data of tickets, right, to see where probably most people are going through, which terminal will likely be busy at this time, because there are going to be multiple flights that are taking off in that terminal at 10:30 a.m. That's one way to look at this. But you do miss a lot of different information in, how wide are the walkways in the airports to allow for the optimal flow of traffic? Are people able to get food on time before their flight takes off? These are certain questions and instances in which it may be beneficial to actually observe what's going on in the airport terminal. Additionally, ethnographies serve as a way for inspiration. We can get a better sense of what subsequent future studies we should do when we've done those observations. And so it may very well be, a lot of people are online for Starbucks at JFK or LaGuardia Airport, and they're not really making their flight. They're hustling and running from the coffee store over to the airport terminal, and it's taking a lot of time. We're observing this because as ethnographers, we're literally sitting in the airport and watching this. Is there any way that we can improve this process? Is there any way that we can do something about this? In media, ethnographies have proven vital in really understanding a lot of consumer behavior at once. So MTV and a lot of other video channels have employed ethnographies and employed market research firms to literally follow teenagers around for a day. Where do they go after school? What do they say in the hallways in school? What do they like to watch at night? Are they on their phones while they're watching television? So especially in an age of multi-platform media consumption, ethnographies have a lot of staying power. Because remember, while you might be watching Netflix and you might be on your phone and Spotify might be playing in the background, Spotify doesn't know that you're watching Netflix and that you're on your cell phone, let's say, and Netflix doesn't know that you're listening to Spotify as well, right? All of this consumer data information is proprietary. If Spotify is on in the room while you're watching Netflix, well, Netflix knows you're watching Netflix, Spotify knows that you're watching Spotify, but there's no communication between either company because everything is proprietary. This is another reason why Spotify has linked together with Hulu, because frankly, if they're in any kind of commercial partnership, this may also mean that there might be data sharing in the future. So ethnographies are a really important method, especially now with big data, apps, and being able to track consumer behavior, because ethnographies can still give this kind of macro viewpoint of what's going on in the greater consumer community. So with that being said, let's get started on our first slide. So if we think about what an ethnography is, we are observing people in a place. It is an actual place. It is a basketball court. It is a cafeteria. It is a business lounge. It is a coffee shop, an airport terminal, a concert, right? Any place in which people are gathered and there's some sort of happening or occurrence, you may observe people. And again, you may also elect to observe the mating habits of gorillas or chimpanzees, or you may elect to go watch tribes in another country, or you may elect to go see Parliament and how Parliament is engaged with each other in policy making. So these are all opportunities to observe people in the field. And so it's critical as we're looking at this bevy of flowers and other flora in this picture to really think about a few things when we're in the field observing people. First is layout. Can I see the participants, right? If I'm watching people, can I see them? Can I hear them? Can I see what they're doing? These are important elements to consider when we're thinking about what field we want to be in and how we want to break out our particular ethnography. Additionally, we also want to think about variety. Will I only see Caucasians? Will I see African Americans? Will I only see males? Will I only see teenagers? We also want to be mindful of the different kind of people that we might see. Now, in an airport terminal, I suspect there really is no lack of diversity. People from many different income levels fly. People of basically every race and or ethnicity fly. Both genders for sure fly. And a lot of different age groups fly as well. So in an airport terminal, we're probably okay there. But if we're doing an ethnography in a high school or in a college, we're going to see mostly undergraduates. And so if we want to see grad students or if we want to see school administrators, we might want to revisit how we're going to be structuring our ethnography to ensure that we will be seeing these people in action, whatever the process is that we're looking at that's under investigation. Third is detail. We want to think about the detail. We want to think about what can we capture from observation. Can I hear what people are saying? Do I care what people are saying? Do I care what people are wearing? Do I care how people are behaving? What kind of behaviors am I interested in measuring here? So detail is really, really important. In an ethnography, you're not counting like you would in a content analysis. Instead, you are taking short, pithy, terse notes. That is the goal here. The goal is to take as many notes down as possible on the variables that you're interested in so as to ensure that you're really capturing a particular moment here. And finally, communication. Communication deals with how we can then, once we get our results, once we have observed all that has gone on in the field and we've taken copious notes, what can we communicate about what we've seen? How might we present this? How might we distill insights from what we've observed into actionable insights? And all of you absolutely should know what actionable insights are here. Actionable insights are things that firms can take with them, things that firms can do. And so these are the 4 parameters that you really should think about when you're considering ethnographies. Let's move along. So for field observation can be used to collect data for inductive reasoning and creating hypotheses or research questions. It focuses on describing a process, and its variance is with words rather than numbers. The aim is to capture participants in an actual setting, rather than in an artificial setting in a laboratory. And so, as I've said before, it's really, really useful when you're doing an ethnography to get a better sense of what's going on, a particular happening. Inductive reasoning and hypothesis generation are vital processes for the ethnographic study itself. It's extremely useful to have this, and it's very, very vital if you're trying to do any kind of exploratory study. Oftentimes, qualitative work, and we've mentioned this earlier, qualitative work is really useful in just kind of exploring things. Sometimes you don't know what's going on with something, right? Maybe you've never been in a tuxedo store. Maybe you've never been at Planned Parenthood. Maybe you've never been in a congressional session. And so as the researcher, you might say to yourself, you know, I don't know. I'm walking into something that I don't know. I don't know anything about this. And for me to do an experiment or a survey or to look at sales data, I need context. And ethnographies are really beautiful in that we can gain context because we're able to see a process really uninhibited or inhibited by anything else. Um, we're not inhibited by biases or different measurements that we're looking at or different lenses that we're looking at, right? An ethnography can measure for a few variables, but again, it's not necessarily fixed like a survey, right? Remember from our survey lecture, if you're writing down questions and then the responses, that's all your respondents are limited to, right? Unless you have an open-ended question. And so with an ethnography, there's a lot of flexibility. And an ethnography will let you know to measure certain things that maybe you didn't think that were measurable or that you should have measured, or maybe things that you would do differently next time. And so ethnographies also are terrific for pilot studies, for just kind of getting a sense of, well, I'm measuring for social identity theory, or I'm measuring for aggression, or I'm measuring for immersion. But what I didn't measure for was brand equity. What I didn't measure for was aggression. What I didn't measure for was mood management. And I'm realizing that the video game player I'm observing in his living room emotes quite a bit depending upon what the character does and say. That's kind of interesting. From a video game design perspective, I can improve the character. Maybe I can create more interaction between the player and the character himself or herself. And so these are just kind of a few instances in which the value behind an ethnography is just so valuable. And it really does allow us to investigate certain situations that we're just not familiar with, situations that might be esoteric in nature. And it's kind of this method in which we get to kind of just observe the process, rather than worrying about measurements and variables and other different elements so carefully. With an ethnography, for sure, you may have variables and things are measured out to be sure and to be clear, but the flexibility that comes with it is so powerful. And it can really change the direction that a company may be going in. So let's get back to the slides and let's go to the next slide. So different types of observation. For one, you may have overt observation, which is participant observation. The researcher is identified at the beginning of the study. Observed participants are aware of this. I might do an overt observation. I might walk into a middle school classroom. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Anthony Palomba. I'm here just to observe your teacher, Mr. Williams. And what I'm interested in seeing is the kind of group activities that you do, right? And I want to see how engaged you are with them. You don't have to tell your participants everything, and in fact, I would caution against it, right? At the end of the study, you can debrief all of your participants on what you were looking for. You can be honest, you can be truthful for sure. But in the beginning of the research study, say what is necessary, only that. The second kind of observation we have here is overt participation. Researcher is identified at the beginning of the study. Observed participants are aware of this. Researcher observes and participates. Yeah, so for some ethnographies, you can actually participate with other participants, thus enriching your insights into it, into the study itself. And so it could very well be, hi everyone, I'm Dr. Anthony Palomba. I'm here doing a study for Hilton Hotels, and we are trying to get a better sense of how our consumers experience our hotel, from the lobby to the food, to the pool, to the bars. And so from there, it may very well be that some of the hotel members know who I am, or if I'm at a bar in the hotel, or if, again, I might be at a school, I'm telling people what's going on, everybody knows, and I'm here to participate because I myself want to get a sense of what I think the hotel experience is against how other people are interacting with the hotel experience. And that might be important, right? It might be important because at a hotel, we're staying with strangers, right? So we want to make sure strangers are having a good time because it elevates the mood and the environment of the overall hotel experience. The third kind of observation is covert observation. The researcher is not identified in the beginning of the study. Researcher simply observes. And so you're not identified when you're doing this study in the airport terminal. And so what might wind up happening here is that the researcher may simply observe people in an airport terminal. It's very likely that he or she will not be telling them or disclosing to them who they are because people have flights. This can also, again, happen at a school in which somebody is just in and they're just observing. Or this might happen at an NBA arena or an NFL stadium, right? Just a researcher kind of observing what's going on with consumers during their game day experience. Finally, we have covert participation. Researcher is not identified at the beginning of the study. Researcher observes and participates. And again, this can be applied to a whole host of different things. So as you can see here, there are two critical pieces to note here. Are you going to identify yourself at the beginning of your study to your participants? And are you going to simply observe, or are you going to participate? And both have pros and cons here. If we're going to observe, then we're not really worried about making connections with other people. That limits us in getting a greater sense of what people are thinking, right? We don't have the opportunity as a researcher to be able to say, well, hey, what do you think of this pool? Or, it's pretty cold in the pool today, right? Or what do you think of these drinks? Or, yeah, these drinks are really good. You can't have these conversations with people, right? Whether we're in a bar, we're in a pool, or wherever else we might be doing an ethnography, wherever else we're observing people. And so if we're merely just observing people, we are being objective and we're just trying to see what people are doing, but we may not be able to kind of get in it a little bit more to get our own sense of it, right? The way that we observe people having a good time is far different than talking to them, right? For instance, I know as a faculty member, I have a lot of students during class who don't look very enthusiastic. I'll later have emails from these students saying, oh my God, your class was unreal. And so we know sometimes when people are showing one kind of behavior, something else might be going inside their mind. So when we simply observe people, we may not be getting the full picture. If we participate, we may be getting a fuller picture of what's going on and getting a real deep sense of the particular process itself. Of course, if you identify yourself at the beginning of the study, it is no longer covert, one, and two, it's also kind of creating this environment in which people know that you're watching them. And anytime that you watch people, behavior tends to shift, even a little bit. So it's something that you have to reconcile on your own as you're designing your own study. But it is something that is important to do as you're moving along in your own ethnographic work. Let's look at the next slide. How to select an observation style. So kind of off of that then, what is the objective? What do you want to observe? Do you need to be a part of it? Those are the two primary questions that you really should be asking yourself as a researcher. Is it necessary to interact with participants to answer research questions? If so, how much research is needed and at what stages? Do I really need to talk to people while they're online at the coffee shop? Or am I participating more so after they get their coffee and they're playing board games in the coffee shop? Is that the stage in which I start talking to people? These are the kinds of things that you want to think about as you're designing your own study here. Interaction with participants can help glean insights as well as uncover a rich personal narrative or influence participant behavior. So obviously, little children may be influenced more by having an adult ethnographer in the room than adults, or they may not. On the playground, many kids may forget that you're there, frankly, because they're having such a good time. And so these are considerations to have as you are designing your own ethnographic study. Let's move along. So structuring a field observation. You want to choose the research site. Am I going to a candy store, an airport, a school, a gym? Where am I going to observe people? You want to also be sure that you can gain access. How public is the setting, and what's the willingness for observation? Obviously, in a park, there's very little concern for privacy. There's a low expectation of privacy there. And so it follows that, gaining access to what people do in a park should be fairly easy. After all, a park is government and it's government run and it's public. And so it's crucial to really think about how much access you might have at a particular place. Sampling. This is a huge, huge problem in ethnographic work. How do we choose individuals or groups to observe, especially in an airport terminal? Good luck specifying that you're only interested in observing African Americans in an airport, or Caucasians, or Hispanic Americans. There's such an influx and such variation of so many different races and ethnicities that you might be a bit flustered if you're only interested in a certain race or ethnicity or person who is flying. That's very difficult to observe. And so, for instance, if the focus of, the ethnographic study is communication at a newspaper firm, let's say, and you're doing some sort of industrial organization study, just seeing how a newspaper firm operates, how many newsrooms should you observe? What participants? Do you have access to them? And do you have consistent access to them? And how long do you need to observe them? Frankly, in an airport terminal, people are coming and going. But in an office, people tend to stay in 1 or 2 or 3 rooms for much of the day. And so it might be easier to observe people there. When you're analyzing data, you need some sort of analysis to build on reoccurring themes here. And so it's very, very useful to also do an ethnographic study with fellow researchers. So having at least 2 researchers on an ethnographic study really allows you to build themes quickly. Exiting. A researcher should have an idea for leaving the area and group under study, especially if this is covert. So again, if it's covert, you don't want to give yourself away. You want to be able to exit the study. Again, and this is my own personal opinion, you should always debrief people. In any kind of setting in which you're engaging with people and you haven't been upfront about what you're doing, I recommend always debriefing people at the end. Again, if this is an airport terminal, you're likely not going to be debriefing anyone because people are coming and going. But if you're in a school, if you're in an office building, if you're elsewhere in a fixed situation, it's important to do so. Let's move along. So pros of ethnographies. They definitely help create foundations and understanding to frame hypotheses, variables, and even research questions. So again, they're really, really good for pilot studies. Getting a sense of a process before we do a second study, which might be a survey or might be an experiment or something else. Researcher collects data from observation rather than participants telling or answering questions from the researcher. And so this is really, really crucial to understand with ethnographic research. I'm not asking you guys on a scale of 1 to 5 how your experience is at the airport terminal, because it might be a cloudy day and it might put you in a bad mood anyway, despite the fact you got through security in a half hour and got your mocha latte in 10 minutes right after going through security. Frankly, that process is pretty quick. And so if you're really thinking about observing people, it does allow for kind of a little bit, kind of a cleaner sense of what's going on in a process, because you're observing what people are doing. And really, as long as you work to be objective and you're focused, you will likely collect data that is pretty bent on human action and really nothing else. Not opinions, not other items. Because frankly, when we ask people something, they have to think about it. Whereas with an action is an action, right? It is incontrovertible that it took you only 20 minutes to get through airport security. That's amazing. You might say that's an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10, but as the researcher and having data from the airport, really that should be a 10 out of 10 because on average, to get through an airport terminal can take upwards of 40 minutes to even an hour. And so sometimes it's best to observe people in those situations because we do have kind of an unbiased third-party sense of what's going on in the room. Access to groups that may not respond to other methods of data collection or research. This is important here. For instance, getting television producers to answer a survey may be difficult, but it may be possible to gain the trust of a few and spend some time on production sets. And that's true. You may not be able to always get people to respond to a survey because it takes work, or respond or participate in an experiment because that takes work, a focus group, that takes work. If I come to the participants and observe them, they're just doing what they're going to be doing. A TV producer will be doing what a TV producer does, right? There's no if, and, or buts. There's no differences here. It's just kind of an observation, and that's what it entails. Field observation largely is inexpensive. It does require some writing materials and a recorder, though expenses may increase if there is much travel involved. And so field observations are pretty good cost-wise. It's the cost of you, the researcher, it's the cost of being there for sure, but you're not paying participants, which is pretty attractive. All you really need is a writing material. It could be a laptop, it could be a notebook, and a recorder. And from there, you really should be set. There might be some travel that might force you to incur some expenses, but by and large, it is a relatively inexpensive method compared to the others. Let's move along. Cons of ethnography. It's not always sunny. And so there is no external generalizability to the population. Remember, we're not really observing a randomized selection of people. I mean, we could, but then we might be getting toward more of an experimental design in which we have some controlled elements here. It's kind of difficult to do that with an ethnography, right? Can I really find a randomized group of females in an airport? Probably not. The same thing goes for males, Asian Americans, etc., etc. We are reliant on researcher perceptions and judgment. And so as objective as we try to be, it's really up to the researcher's lens to inform the study. So myself, as a Caucasian male, I might pay more attention to the stars on Saturday Night Live who are Caucasian and male versus the minority stars, right? And it isn't to say that I'm prejudiced or racist or anything like that, but it is to say that I simply might focus my attention elsewhere. And that's kind of important to note if you're going to have a researcher observe a different group of people that may be different from him or her. So there may be researcher bias there. Usually only one observer is in a study. It's really useful to have multiple people conducting an ethnography. This isn't always easy to do, and it is more costly because you're inviting more people along. But cross-validation from other observers is really useful. Finally, the process of being under observation may impact participant behavior. I mean, this is certainly possible as well here. And so it's something to be mindful as we move along. And so, as we can see from ethnographies, it's very complex. It's a really great process in just simply being able to observe people, but we know that a lot is at stake. And we know that we constantly have to pay attention to a whole host of different behaviors. If we're in a coffee shop, do we observe how many people are online? Do we observe how many people are looking at the menu? Do we observe who already knows their drink and who doesn't? Can we also observe who struggles with their order and maybe who doesn't? These are certain considerations we always have to think about as we're moving along in our ethnographic design. How do we design it? What are we looking for? And what do we hope to glean from it? Well, that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.